This week on Roleplay Geeks, when do you roll dice and when do you just roleplay it? Also, John shoots some books. Jim turns to Chris for advice on his character death problems. Stephen fails at shutting down a nuclear reactor. Chris kills the entire group, while Frank channels Liam Neeson in a vain attempt to intimidate. And finally, Steve-O throws the Jimmy dice. Buckle in for another fun ride because it's Freebird!
Welcome to Roleplay Geeks. I'm your host, Frank.
I'm your token hippie, John.
I'm Batman.
You're awful short and bald for a Batman, aren't you?
I'm Batman.
Okay, you're Batman, sure.
You're like that Jay and Silent Bob version of Batman.
Oh, yeah.
Hey.
Or you're more like the penguin doing cosplay.
There we go.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Steve-O, a.k.a. the other Steve.
And this week we're going to talk about something that's a little difficult to follow along, but hopefully it'll make sense. It's kind of a GM-centric type of thing, but it impacts players, obviously, and it's important to bring them in. And that is rolling for information clues. In other words, when do you have players roll for information clues in something, or do you just provide the information? And it's a little tricky topic to talk about, and we've invited a guest on, which we've had on before, Chris. Chris, thank you for joining us on today's topic.
Oh, not a problem. Thanks for having me back.
All right, so let's kind of kick off this discussion a little bit, and I think we need to sort of define these two scenarios. Can someone give me an example of each?
Ooh,
someone that's
clues.
not Steve-O.
Oh, Steve-O. Well,
How's it going, man? I was giving up the floor there.
Well, no. Get this, Steve. Well, for example, in Traveler,
Drink.
Oh, drink.
there may be a situation where you are faced with a giant, multi-armed, menacing murder droid, and you throw out clues like bullets don't harm it and all the Marines are dead as a way to coax your players in a direction. So that's one way.
That's an
What's the other way
example
to do
of you don't have to roll for that information. You get that for free.
So that's contextual given information. So you're describing the scene, and then hopefully your players understand the scope of what it is you're trying to lay out for them, and they make decisions based upon their understanding of that scope. Now, what's the? Go ahead, Steve.
And then I was just going to say, and in John's case, that means he's going to shoot it.
Damn straight.
Until his head gets ripped off. And he's floating in two different directions in space at the same time.
It was awesome.
And then, of course, the other way to do this is you lean on the character's abilities in some form or fashion, whether it be their skills or their raw ability or something like that. And you say, make a roll, and to see if you know something or determine something. And really the heart of this topic today is trying to discern when it makes sense to do one versus the other. And in part of that, I think we're going to talk a little bit about when it's fun versus one versus the other, both from a GM and a player standpoint. So let's bounce it to Chris now. Is there one that you use predominantly, or is it you kind of mix it up? And if you do, how do you make that determination of when you're going to make a player roll versus you should figure this out?
I think a lot of it is situational, definitely. If it's something that's just real minor that you want to get the game kind of moving along, it's okay to feed them that information. But in other situations, say the group runs into a monster that they've never encountered before, and then you have them make some sort of appropriate check, like a knowledge check or something like that. And then the way I've done it in the past is you kind of feed them, depending on how well they roll, will depend on what sort of information they get, whether it's weaknesses, special attacks, special abilities, or anything like that. And it's really trying to balance player knowledge versus character knowledge. I mean, you recognize something, you're like, oh, that's a demon and do this and that, but does your character know that? So you kind of use that to I guess, make it a little more realistic, I suppose, when you're fighting some creature, or if you find some amazing magical weapon and they're trying to figure out exactly what it does. It's more fun to let them kind of discover it on their own and help them along as they do that. So, I mean, those are some of the types of situations when you definitely want them to have their characters try to figure that out.
So I'm going to sort of divide the field a little bit here arbitrarily, because obviously there's crossover in most cases. But I'm going to go ahead and treat Jimmy and Steve-O and Chris as sort of the GM side of things, and John and Steven and I as sort of the player side of things, which, again, arbitrary. There's a lot of crossover, but let's just do that for the sake of argument for a few minutes. So, Jimmy, when do you determine? Well, my experience playing with you as a player is, more often than not, you have a cycle, which tends to be, I'm going to describe things, and then I'm going to have you roll, as opposed to reversing that. So it feels like maybe incorrectly, but it feels like your decision criteria is slightly different than what Chris is laying out. So what do you think?
It's going to depend on your players to a large degree. So like Chris said, there's a threshold I have initially. The threshold is it trivial or impossible? So if it's something trivial, you're not ever going to roll for it. And if it's impossible, you're not going to roll for that either. I mean, if you're trying to jump across a chasm that's, a mile long, you're not ever going to do that. I don't care what your athletic skill is. So, and likewise, if you're looking for a specific book in on a shelf that has 5 books on it, you're going to know immediately. You don't have to roll to see whether it's there or not. So those are trivial or impossible things. And then once you're past that, then it's whether or not it falls. I think D&D has a mechanism for this that's really good, is the passive checks. So it's a way for you to resolve a check that necessarily doesn't have to have a roll, but it's like built into the character. And Chris can probably help me out here, but I believe it's something like 10 plus your ability check and then your proficiency, if you have it, for the skill you're applying. So if you're going to be searching for traps, if the rogue's just going through a corridor and you're in a dangerous situation, he doesn't always have to say, I'm going to search for a trap in this 5-foot square section. I'm just going to assume that he's passively looking for traps as he's walking down, sort of checking it out. And then when a trap comes up, I'll just apply that passive check, which is going to be you don't need to roll. You just say, I'm going to say it's, in order to see this particular trap, it's going to be a 14 or better. And then, he's got a 10 plus whatever his proficiency is for that. And then if it passes, then he sees it. If it doesn't. And now, if it goes to active, then he gets additional bonuses because he's actively looking for traps. So that's sort of how I apply it. So and now with players, so with you guys in particular, I'll describe something to you, and I'll describe it, I think, in a very clear way, and I think this is something we still need to work on. And then you guys continue to try to shoot at something that is clearly invincible for the weapons you have, and it's incredibly dangerous. And so I describe it, I give you options, you don't take those options, then I'm like, okay, roll so that I can see whether or not you see something that says, clearly, you're an idiot if you stay here and you want to try to keep shooting at this thing that clearly you can't kill. Then I'll roll to give you the obvious thing. You better run or I'm going to kill you.
You're an enemy of hope. That's what you are, Jimmy.
I have to interject there, because the way you described the kind of the demise of the Marines that had been there before us was there were bullet holes littering the walls.
Yeah, so like I said, I
bullet
did
holes littering the
that.
walls come across to me as these guys couldn't. They could not that didn't penetrate, that they couldn't.
They were stormtroopers.
They were stormtroopers. They were in the dark, or something else was going on.
So I did say, I got to work on the communication thing, because clearly I didn't communicate it well enough.
So yeah, I didn't think bolts aren't going to hurt it. I'm thinking I just got to hit it.
So, Steve-O, again, from my perspective as a player, and this may not be accurate, it feels like you tend to not go to the roll thing very often.
Oh, you're crazy, man! I can have you guys roll dice all the time.
Okay,
Remember?
well, I'm wrong, but when do you make that determination?
Just ask Steve. Am I wrong, Steven?
It's fine. I'm wrong. Let's move past it.
I remember you started making jokes about me saying roll 2 dice.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm 100% wrong. Now, when do you make the determination? How does that calculus work in your case?
So if it's super important for you to know, I might say I usually tell people to roll dice. I'm gonna a little game master secret here. I have people roll dice a lot of times just to keep you engaged in the game. It may mean nothing.
You bastard.
I do the same thing. It's good to keep people on their toes, to randomly tell them to roll something. They're like, what?
Exactly. But then sometimes there's going to be an important piece of information, and I'll just have everybody roll the dice. Or let's say it's a situation you're walking down a corridor and there's some enemies around the corner. And I'll have everybody roll a couple dice. Whoever rolls the best or whatever, I'll say, hey, you hear some activity up ahead, or you think you hear soldiers coming or something. What are you going to do? But usually when it's a perception roll or a history roll or something like that, I'll have, it'll be something trivial. Like in my last campaign I played with you guys, the Call of Cthulhu campaign. There was a trivial bit of information you kept rolling for, Frank, because you worked at the university and knew the history of the university. And I think you rolled for it 4 times before you finally got it. But it wasn't important. It added a little bit of texture to the adventure, a little bit of context, but it wasn't important to move it forward. If it's something very important to move it forward, I may have everybody roll dice, but somebody's going to get the roll, if you get my point. Just because I have to have somebody realize this thing, or have somebody find the scroll or find the book. But I use dice rolls a lot just because, yeah, I like to keep everybody engaged. And then if somebody asks me a question, often I'll say, well, I don't know, roll a couple dice. Let's see if you know that. I do that quite a bit too.
So, Steve-O, I forgot that you had him roll 4 times for that piece of information. It's been a little while, but why would you do that? I mean, why would you have him roll 4 times for a piece of information? Why not just give it to him if it requires 4 rolls and he's going to get it? I mean,
because to me, it added to the game a little bit of randomness. Like for instance, what we're talking about is who the if you guys remember, there was kind of a magic using crazy guy. So he's a professor, and every time I'd say, Frank, roll a couple dice, and he'd miss the roll, and I'd say, there's something about this guy, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Yeah. And then it would be another night, and then when you guys encountered him again, I'd have Frank roll again, and Frank missed the roll again. You say, there's still something about this guy. You can't quite place what you know something about him. And to me, it just adds to the game that, like, I should know something about this. What is it? And then finally he got it. I wanted him to get it, but it wasn't important that he get it at any specific time. That's why I knew he'd get it eventually. I mean, sooner or later you're going to roll the right dice. You're going to roll the right number.
So from a player perspective, guys, when do you like to grab the dice versus when do you find it frustrating or annoying or whatever that you're asked to roll for something you feel like you should know or should be able to get?
I just want to interject really quick and let you know how uncomfortable I feel as a player right now, knowing full well for years that the people that I know and love who DM are liars. But
I do.
You just realized this?
Yeah. No. I realized that. I just didn't realize you were so uncaring and cavalier about it. So that's a harsh reality I've got to come to terms with.
Hey, Steve. It's a game, role playing game.
Hey, Steven, can you roll some dice for me?
Yeah, I was going to say he figured that out without rolling
roll a couple dice. See if you figure out I'm a liar or not. Roll 2 dice, MF. That's what you told me one time.
He's been
I can never trust you.
he's failing his
None of
rolls
you
for
ever
years.
again.
So,
Why don't
okay.
you roll the damn dice?
Okay, so back to the question though: is do you like when you're told roll some dice, or do you find it?
I mean, I think because it is engaging. It's like, oh, there's something to do here. There's something I need to figure out, and you're hoping you're going to roll well. I find it kind of fun. So, I mean, it's not like, oh my God, it's the middle of battle, but it's still part of the story. It's part of, engaging in the whole, communal storytelling part of it and stuff. And so me rolling the dice and maybe finding something out or noticing something kind of carries along. I mean, like exactly what Steve-O was talking about with Frank. That was a really cool thing that, Frank had like, man, you should know something about this guy. There's something that's just nagging at you. And the fact that he kind of carried it out over several nights before you finally got it, was kind of like this cool payoff. Like you finally rolled it. He's like, oh, yeah, you figure out blah, blah, blah. And it was like really cool. I mean, I thought that was just a really neat aspect to it because it brought this whole thing together. And you've been kind of like, well, what the heck is Frank supposed to know? That come on, man, roll better. Come on. It was, I thought it really helped bring the story around a little bit, even though it was just kind of minuscule. It just added to the story. It added some flavor and some fullness and richness to it. So,
and another, I'm going to add one more thing about how I use dice rolls. And sometimes I like to see what the dice roll is going to be. It'll affect what my answer is. So and again, I like to let the players help tell the story, just like John just pointed out. It's interactive storytelling. So if the player rolls extremely well, then I'm going to feel the obligation to give him a double payoff, an extra payoff, right? I mean, I could just deliver the information or let the result stand, but it helps me sometimes build the story as well. He rolls super good, or he doesn't get the roll, or he just barely made it. All those factors into how I'm going to react at delivering information or delivering the goods or letting him find something or whatever. So full disclosure here, I don't remember having to roll over multiple nights. Like it was.
I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that in this particular case, I can say that the impact was lessened because I didn't connect the subsequent rolls as having anything to do with the past rolls, and so they were all isolated incidents. In this way, I was about as attentive as your average Jimmy.
I was going to say, man, I didn't give that to Jimmy. I gave it to you.
Not cool.
So
I will have to say that I use it quite a lot when we did the post-apocalyptic one I ran you guys through as a GM. I use it quite a lot and stuff in terms of, because I think it was, Jimmy, you guys were searching through these military bases.
For pudding.
Right. But you rolled a critical success one time on your perception roll.
Hence the tapioca.
You didn't find the pudding. You found the
that
really high-end sniper rifle that did so much damage, if you remember. That was actually a little bit. It was kind of game-killing to an extent because he sit there and take out people in one shot.
Just make sure he finds a limited amount of ammunition.
Yeah. Well, actually, then his next time they went to one, he rolled critically again for ammunition. It was like I kind of shot myself in the foot.
Hey, you find 5 whole rounds. Hey, it's post-apocalyptic, man.
So, something that we haven't shared about Steven, at least my perception, is when we play things like board games, which we do occasionally, but not very often. The ones that I think Steven reacts very negatively to are the ones that have a lot of randomness associated with it. So he doesn't tend to like games that he can't influence the outcome very much because of some random element. So I could be wrong, but my perception here is that if that translates over to role-playing games, which it may not, this idea of rolling for something, do you find that frustrating? It may not. It may not carry over. I'm just curious.
No, not in the same way. Well, it depends. If it's a situation where everything is down to a damn die roll, everything, it gets tedious. Everything. But the great thing about a role-playing game, and even ones that are done poorly, where either the particular system isn't so great or the DM isn't so great, the fact that you do have all of these other characteristics that you can draw from to help influence those things. And I think of those roles more as environmental in a lot of ways, that they're things that I don't necessarily have control over. Wow. I wish I could approach life like that. Sorry, that's just a big realization. And everybody on screen just kind of smiles a little bit at me and nods sadly. Thank you, guys. But yeah, the difference, man, that's sad. That is so sad.
He's having a mental breakthrough and a breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, you get sad a lot on this podcast.
I know, right?
Roll for happiness.
Critical fail.
Roll a couple dice for me there, buddy.
Yeah, I roll with advantage, but they're both ones. So that's great. But yeah, I think of it more as environmental and kind of adjacent to the actual play. Now, I do appreciate it when it's used and the DM is specifically using it to counter metagaming. There's so many times when you play and you just know.
So it's like Chris saying about, it's a demon, but does your character know it's a demon?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Chris has had to deal with that a lot.
So it's interesting the things that we popped around here as examples, and I want to nail down that a little bit more. I'm going to bounce over again to Chris, bring him back into the fold. Almost all the examples that you gave, Chris, had to do with things like knowledge. So these sort of, I want to call them secondary skills. Maybe that's not fair, but typically whenever we're talking about particularly Dungeons and Dragons, it's your ability to cast a spell, it's your ability to swing a sword. Those are the things that are your primary things that you do. And in a lot of games, it's action things that you're testing. And then you've got this knowledge stuff that sort of backgrounds that. And D&D is a particularly interesting case because you've got all these skills that may have no impact on playing. You could have a character that has a lot of skills that you never touch ever because of the campaign that you're running. So do you think of these checks as sort of a secondary thing? Or do you think of them as a primary, or do you mix it up?
Well, it's all situational. It's, even the secondary ones become primary in the situations that they're appropriate for. Like if you're, really suave and you're making a bluff check where you're trying to lie to somebody, I think going back to the whole metagame thing that Steve was talking about, you kind of need that to mitigate the reality of that situation, because you can sit there and, I saw someone describe your intelligence versus your character's intelligence. Like if you're this hyper intelligent wizard and you try to relate something to somebody that's scientific, well, you're not going to be able to do that on your own. You don't have all the years and years of study that your wizard had or something. So you need those checks to kind of make their actions fit into the overall situation. Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you're like a bard or something like that and you're a super talented guitar player, which I'm not, but my character is, then I can, use that. And as the DM, you rock out this, full-on anthem with a 13-minute guitar solo and everyone loves it and the crowd's going crazy. You're getting hit by bras thrown from the crowd and that kind of thing. So you can use those secondary checks and skills for kind of.
What happens if you fail the roll though as a bard, and you're playing your guitar and you fail?
Well, people like start to leave. People are talking over you while you're playing. It's like being at a show. And you go to see your buddy's band and you've heard this song a million times. You're not really paying attention. Or if someone screws up, a string breaks, something like that. I think a lot of that lays on the DM to kind of give it that extra flavor.
What if they're playing Freebird though? I mean,
I'd throw rocks.
That's a critical success.
Depends on where you are.
Play Free
So-
Bird.
I heard that a million freaking times when I used to play it.
So let's
Free bird.
so let's talk a little bit more about this primary secondary to get to the idea of what things do you check. And I'm just going to throw this out to anybody. What is it? Just skills that you check? What do you do when you have to check something? We talked about knowledge. Do you have knowledge? Which is about as generic as they get, right? I mean, it's just sort of history is another good example. Do a history check. Well, you can be an expert in this history, but not know anything about that history. So how do you determine, all the kind of calculus, the success, what skills to pick, which ones do you check against, all that sort of stuff? Steve-O.
Well, it just depends on what the characters are trying to achieve. If they're in let's go back to Call of Cthulhu, my most recent game that I ran. If all the characters are trying to do library check, find an ancient tome in a gigantic library, then obviously the character that has library use, his skills are going to come into play. But if it's, of course, important to the adventure, I may have to have them roll a couple times. If they roll like a really bad success or failure rather, but they have to find the book for whatever reason to continue the adventure, then I'll just make them stay in the library an extra 4 hours.
What skill is that, Steve-O, that you have to roll to find that
library
book?
use?
There's a thing called library use?
There is, yes. I mean, it's part of Call of Cthulhu. Now, if there's some specific thing going on, or let's say you have to find the book and none of the characters have library use, then I'll just find the next closest skill and roll against that. But quite often, I just tell everybody to roll a couple of dice, and I try to take the highest dice roll. And again, that's not in the rules of any game that I'm aware of. I mean, if there are skills that are close to the task, I will have the characters pick those. But if it's just something like trying to see something at random, usually that's perception or something. But a lot of times if it's something I know, you have to notice for whatever reason to keep the adventure going, then again, I'll pick the skills if they're there. If not, I'll just have everybody roll a couple of dice and say, Jimmy, you notice a painting on the wall. There's something odd about it. And then, of course, Jimmy's going to say, well, we're going to take a closer look at it.
And the painting punches you in the eye.
But again, I could just say it without anybody rolling dice. But the fact that I have everyone roll dice, and then whoever got the highest roll, or often in the case of Call of Cthulhu, it's the lowest roll. But whoever scores the best roll gets to take the lead on this investigation.
What do you do with characters like John, who's a murder hobo, and he uses his gun combat for all of his skills? Like, we need to find this book in the library. I start shooting the books. I shoot the library.
I look at John, and John, we've done this many times in the past. I'll look at John, the player, and as the game master, and say, John, you're not supposed to kill these guys. Okay, you need to talk to them. Okay, now let's continue.
Okay, so that gets to a point that's a little adrift, but related to this topic in general, which Jimmy raised earlier on, which is contextual clues versus rolling. Okay, so you're telling a story, and that story has certain plot beats, and at some point, you've got to hit those beats in some form or fashion. All right, and this is a little different than some background information or some bit of color or flavor to the story. Do you rely on rolling whenever you're doing that? Do you just look at the player and go, dude, this is just what it is, like Steve-O was saying, or how much do you turn to rolling as a way to resolve the miscommunication, as we mentioned earlier, where, okay, the players just aren't getting what you're laying down?
So like when we did the post-apocalyptic one, and I was trying to funnel Steven into finding a way to get to the nuclear reactor to try and repair it. And I brought this up I think maybe 2 podcasts ago about that. But anyway, I kept trying to say stuff and he just did not pick up on it. And I didn't want him to roll. I just kept trying to do things, and I don't know if I think he was overthinking it
No, Steve overthink. I can't imagine that.
I know. So, and the thing is, but I did not want to just give it to him, and I didn't want to do it as a role, so I didn't. I was like, all right, this thing is about to blow. You guys got to do something. I mean, and I think I gave you about 30 minutes to try and figure out some stuff around it, and then I was like, yeah, it's going to blow. You're done.
Your problem is you didn't give him like weird stuff to solve the problem with. You see a can of tuna, a bonsai tree, and a painting
and a towel.
Yeah, maybe.
I know how to do this.
I mean, admittedly, as a GM, that was all on me. I should have done something a little different. But the thing is no other players kicked in and said, "Well, can we pull those panels off?"
Yeah, you jackasses,
or anything like that. No, nobody said anything. So, I just left it. I was like, well. If Steve's the only one that's engaging and trying to do this, then I'll give it to him and I'll try and do something with it. So, but I didn't want to just give it away, and I didn't really want to make it like a roll. I think I did have you roll like once or twice, and I think you rolled horribly or something, and it was like,
yeah. How do you do that, Chris? When you're in a game and you're like, okay, we've got to get from point A to point B, and they need this bit of information. Is it a case where you just give them that information, or sometimes are you like, okay, roll for it, and then you have a contingency in mind that if they succeed it, okay, they go there the easy way. If they fail it, they have to go there this other way. It's like the fork in the road where you got the scary trees off to one side and then the nice shiny trees off to the other side.
I think it's definitely it's all about giving your players the illusion of control. That even though you have this sort of outline of goals and missions they're going to complete or whatever, I think if you don't give them the opportunity to roll every once in a while, they're going to begin to feel like they're being railroaded into this story. That you're just telling them, okay, you see this, and then they're not really playing. They're just sort of okay, now what do we do? Okay, now what do we do? And then, okay, let's fight. It's, you're giving them that chance to kind of determine their own fate, and especially if like in a case where they're just not getting it. I think then it largely falls on whoever's running the game to throw them a bone every once in a while and to say, maybe notice something they wouldn't normally notice, or they're not noticing, fudge a roll, something like that. I do that every once in a while. Yeah, it's tough to do it without just grabbing them by the hand and leading them along, because then you might as well just be playing a video game at that point.
I'm going to throw something else out there. So, game masters and the perception of the players when you see the game master roll dice. Do you guys do it as game masters?
Oh yeah.
Just the players are doing something, and then you just reach over and roll a couple dice.
I'll do that anytime. Anytime I feel they're kind of getting a little, the tension's drifting or whatever, you just roll some dice, and then you just sort of look, flip a page and go, okay, all right. Then they're like, "Oh, what'd you roll?" Nothing. Then he forces them to have to pay attention. They just start panicking.
Yeah. I'll go, "Oh crap! Okay, go ahead. What you guys doing now?"
Right. Yeah. Or even if you ask them, "Are you sure?"
Yeah.
They will completely freak out.
Sure,
as
that's
players.
what you want to do.
Really? Yeah. Oh, you're going to do that? Oh.
All right.
And then roll a die and then flip a page. Okay. Write something down.
Yeah, Steve-O's bad for that, man, particularly in travel. It freaks me out every time. I'm second guessing myself. I'm like totally weirded out every time I play Steve-O games, because I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I mean, I was just eating a tuna sandwich, and he's like, sure you want to do that? Where did you get that tuna from? It was from the back of the refrigerator? Okay.
Oh, I'm afraid you missed the expiration date on that one. Oh.
Yeah, roll 2 dice. Jim.
Critical fail.
It expired in Mexico in 1986.
So, okay, I have a tangent question from that. Does anyone do the thing where some DMs do, where the DM does checks for players, knowledge or whatever?
No, I always have the players roll it. I actually don't like that. I like it being in the hands of the player. Their fate is in their hands. So if it's something they have to know or whatever, I'll say roll a couple of dice again, and if they don't get it, then they don't get it. But I do not like to roll things that directly affect the player. Now, usually I'll use rolls to randomly determine something for myself. Like, I don't know how many enemies I want. Or, for instance, somebody, there's a random rock falls from the top of the cave. And I'll roll, if I was doing this game today, I would roll a d6. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 would be the NPC. And I would determine it that way. I like to add some randomness to my own thought process as I'm rolling the game out. Like I said, the way I do games now is sort of an idea. Nothing is set in stone. Kind of a loose conflagration of ideas. So I like to add that randomness to my own running of a game in order to make it exciting for me to have to come up with what happens next.
I don't like that randomness. I don't like it at all because it usually results in my character either being in the ground or pooping in a bag from a hospital bed. I'm not a fan.
Jimmy, I don't know why, man. You're like a bullet magnet, man.
He is.
I don't know.
It's like the universe hates me or something. Is that random?
No, Steve-O just has a set of Jimmy Killer dice.
Apparently.
Yeah, one of my D6s, when it rolls, it just says Jimmy.
Yeah.
The sad thing is all 6 sides say Jimmy.
It's a dice of Jimmy slaying. That's what it's a magic.
I don't like those dice.
Yeah.
Those dice suck.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the player side of things a bit. That is kind of, again, a tangent from this, but what could players bring to the table to make rolling to find out information less annoying to do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, they could be more engaged and pay attention.
I know when I'm playing, because again, I'm not the best player in the world.
No.
But I know a lot of times I'll go into a room and I'll just start saying, "Can I roll perception? Can I look for, can I do this? Do you want me to roll a couple dice, see if I find something?" I mean, I'm suggesting it, as opposed to waiting for the game master to ask me to roll a couple dice. And then usually they'll say, "Yeah, go ahead." Yeah, you don't see anything.
Yeah, that's the worst thing a player can do. It's like, wait for the game master to describe the room, describe the environment.
That's what I said. I'm a terrible player.
Yeah,
man.
You're just awful. and then pay attention and then focus on saying, I'm really curious about, this thing. I want to examine it.
I'll remember that next time we play.
Yeah.
I'll try to remember.
No, you won't.
Probably not.
So that's
Chris,
definitely one thing.
Do you have any thoughts on that? On this general idea?
I think it's definitely paying attention, because it's the give and take between the players and the DM or whatever. But also, I've played with people who are really just overly enthusiastic. So it's whoever ends up going first is the loudest, the first person to talk or something like that. Well, I'm going to go do this. It's like, I'm not done. Let me finish describing the room. You just rushing in there. And then, some people just keep doing that. I'm like, well, you apparently didn't see the monster. Well, why didn't you have me make a check? Look, because you just freaking ran in there. That's why you're not playing with me here. You're playing against me all of a sudden, and in those situations, it's not you versus the DM. It's you with the DM trying to further the situation, the story, the narrative or whatever. And it's not just like, a contest to get in there first, to be the first person to do all the stuff. It's just like, let me set the stage and then decide where you want to go, not just automatically assume that there's going to be something to fight or something to grab or, that type of thing. It's just like slow it down, be patient, don't, try to hasten your demise because I can hasten it for you. Like that kind of thing.
You're rolling a check, but you're rolling a check to see whether you end up in the monster's stomach or not.
Right.
Oh, you're Jimmy? Critical fail.
So Steven, what do you think about this as mostly a player? What do you think you do or don't do as a player that influences whether you have to roll or not roll for a particular contextual clue? Do you think there's any connection there whatsoever?
Yeah.
Do you think there is, but you don't have any thoughts on it? Okay.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
I as a player, whether you realize it or not, and in my case, it's not until sometimes much later that whatever you were doing had a smattering of asshattery or douchebaggery, and you needed reeled in. Now I know some people just game like that normally, and it's a chore for the DM, and the DM has to really fight to make it work. I'm not quite sure I'm answering the question, but
well, I think some of that what you're describing can be some of it's personality driven, some of it's just so for example, Jimmy and I have a very long established pattern of him describing something as a GM, and he's thinking there's 3 or 4 clear avenues of move forward, and I'll pick avenue 17. And then he'll say, I don't understand why you're doing this. But from my perspective, that's one of the 3 or 4 possible avenues. And it's just, whatever happens as a player GM dynamic, creates tension, but it also is a bit of miscommunication, confusion between the two of us of understanding what's going on. And, that's part of me not paying attention as fully as I should, and part the way Jimmy's communicating. But that, I think you're right. Sometimes things perceived as hattery. So I've got this not perception. This people think of me as somebody who's contradictory when I game, and I don't think I'm being contradictory. So I don't perceive that what is coming across as contradictory is not intended to be. That's not what I'm trying to do. And I think that creates challenges from do you understand what's going on versus, okay, you need a roll for this to sort of figure things out.
Well,
and I've got a bit of field of this topic, but I think that to
it's
piggyback
kind of
off what you're saying, Steve.
Generally, a lot of times in their personality, you can be a contrarian. And
I can. I mean, I am a contrarian.
So the thing is that kind of comes across that way in the game. I think that's part of the reason that. So it's like, well, he's just doing it because that's his personality, and so he's just doing it here too. Not with the knowledge at all. He's just perceiving it a different way. And there's 3 or 4, Frank, not 17. Stop.
Well, I think sometimes too, like people will have. I've noticed with some players, you'll have they'll make a character, and the character will, the character could be different every time, but their role-playing personality is the same every time. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter what is on the paper, they're going to be playing the exact same way every time. They're going to go in, they're going to kill people, they're going to just act their character is secondary to their role-playing personality. And I think sometimes that especially if you played a lot, it's hard not to fall into that because you are so used to doing these things, to making these rolls, to encountering these monsters, to having these types of adventures, that you kind of slip into that rather than what your character would do, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah.
The metagaming line.
It's kind of like your comfort zone, though. It's your go-to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do it with role-playing computer games all the time. I'll play through the game the first time, and I'll think, okay, man, I'm going to do a totally different character, and I'm going to play it a totally different way, and I always end up playing exactly the way I played last time. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, you find things that work, and I think you do that in role-playing games, too. You just find you you find your comfort zone, and that's the way you play it.
Your style.
Steve's pretty good at role playing, probably better than the rest of us, I think. More so is trying to create a character with a complex kind of background and, emotional issues.
Well, this teases into, I think, a bigger topic, but I think it's worth touching on for a second here. Is, again, this is my perception, and I've started doing this a lot. I realize that I've been doing exactly what Chris is describing. Frank is playing like Frank wants to play, not how a character should be played, and going from Steven's predilection for creating complicated, dynamic characters in his head that doesn't often communicate, but they're there. I've started doing things, trying to think of what my character is like, and I think it creates a bit of challenge. There's a lot of dynamics here at play. One is, yes, Steven does create very complicated backstories, but I've noticed they tend to all be different ways of explaining why Steven plays like Steven. So he tends to do a lot of the same things.
Oh my gosh, my mind is blown.
Right. It's because this character had this very complicated backstory, which is why he does.
Why he always runs away, stays in the ship, doesn't go out and explore.
Holds his action, whatever it is. But and it's logical. You go, well, yes, that makes sense for that character. But why do all your characters, even though they're very varied backstories, have the same basket of activity? They tend to do. And in fairness, where I want to say this also goes is that sometimes the dynamics of the rules really only allow for one or a limited set of manifestations, right? So the complexity of your character doesn't change the fact that most of what you're supposed to do is shoot things or stab things. I mean, that's right. What most of the games are built around. For example, one way I think that Jimmy could have changed the dynamics of how he wanted us to deal with the situation he created in Traveler would be to have us not have guns. I mean, it was completely reasonable within the confines of the story for us simply not to have weapons at all. And that would have forced us to do things, not shoot things way. Now, can be an argument made for that's a railroad and all that sort of stuff, but I'm just saying that I think that sometimes the rules kind of push us to do things in certain ways. I'm just going to leave that out there as that.
Well, I think it really depends on the system that you're playing. If something is just a real generalized combat thing or knowledge base, or the characters are maybe only like 5 or 6 stats, then I think it definitely opens that. I mean, you're definitely there. It's the type of game you're going to be playing, where if you play something that is a lot more open-ended, then it provides that opportunity to be a little more more generalized, or to become more specific about what your character can and cannot do.
Hey, Chris, I got a quick question for you while I have you here. Have you ever had a case where you've had a player and the player gets severely injured, and then he could die, or he or she could die, and then do you leave it up to the dice rolls to determine whether that character lives or dies? And as a follow-up, what if we change it just slightly and say that character, because of the way you do that, you let the dice decide if that's what you do. He has died in the last 5 campaigns that you've done. I'm asking for a friend. I mean, how do you how do you handle that as a game master? Because there's some people that might be able to learn from you of how not to kill a character.
Well, that is also, again, situational. If it's a really dramatic scene, or if it's the final boss battle of the whole campaign, I usually don't like to kill PCs. I don't like to, but sometimes it happens. For instance,
particularly if your name is Jimmy.
Steve was a part of this one where I was running a campaign and everybody died. I mean, there was just really no way to keep the suspension of disbelief going, and everyone ended up dying. So as a result of that, in order to sort of resurrect everybody, I gave everybody little supplemental characters, like little acolytes who had to gather up their bodies and take it to some mysterious guy to get them resurrected, as they were the chosen ones or something silly like that. So even though they died, then all of a sudden, you throw them for a loop and be like, okay, now you're this guy, you're Father Bernard, and you have a limp, and a cleft palate, and you have to go and something. But I don't think that was it. But and to give them something else to do. I really don't like to kill anybody. But sometimes, you do need to be reminded that there's a certain mortality rate in dungeons.
Sometimes, not every time, right? Sometimes.
Not every time. Now, but you do run into characters sometimes who just charge in blindly every time, going back to role-playing styles. We knew a guy who, he just had he could have made a book, like a stack of us dead characters. Because I'm going to run into the room. There's a dragon in there. I don't care. Woo! And he goes in there, and of course,
Leroy,
lo and behold, he dies, why did I burn up? And because you're a moron. Your characters have no sense of self-preservation.
You are made of flesh. That is why.
A heart beats within his chest.
Look at Steve-O over there blinking angrily from the corner. I do understand.
Okay, so
he doesn't.
I just think I get an awfully bad reputation for killing characters.
Well,
I actually hate it when characters die. I really do. But again, the games that I run are deadly games. They just don't have the same zillions of hit points that Dungeons and Dragons does. You take one gunshot wound and you can die. That's right. If you're going to make it, there has to be a sense of danger for your characters.
I need to stop wearing magnetized suits. I put on my magnetized coat and magnetized tie.
Yeah.
So, actually, my favorite role-playing scenario that I have ever done, and I don't know that I'm sure other things I've done since then people would say, no, that was better. But my absolute favorite was a combination of some of the things we've touched on here, which was in Siva's campaign. I died. First character I ever lost. 100% my fault. So completely justifiable kill. But I was playing a character that was a Marine, but he had washed out because of basically PTSD, though I didn't call it that, sort of pre-PTSD being a commonplace term days. And so we walked into a room in an ancient temple in Traveler Drink, and there was a creature or something that came out of the floor. And I had an autogun with a grenade launcher on it. And I missed the detail because I wasn't paying close enough attention that Steve-O said, which is a 10 by 10 room. And so I walked in, saw this thing, launched a grenade at it. And Steve-O said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I literally thought about it as a player. And I went, no, this actually kind of makes sense for my character. And I did it, and it exploded, and it killed me. Predictably so, because I took most of the damage, and it didn't kill the creature completely. But that was my favorite because it was very much a role-playing scenario. And I did it based upon my initial reaction. I, as a player, was shocked there was a creature in the room, as well as my character was shocked there was a creature in the room. So, sometimes death can be both fun for the player, but also completely legitimate for the game scenario.
Yeah, did he make you roll for it?
He did. He said, "All right, roll your damage," and it was the rules in Travel has a splash damage or whatever, and I was in it, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, I had to roll for it, and
it's like 6d6, man.
Yeah, it was a lot of.
Hey, more importantly, did the monster survive?
No, the monster survived.
Yes.
That was the. But anyway, it was a useless sacrifice, but it made complete sense for my character also. And now going back to what Chris said a little bit earlier about the rule set, one of the things I'm finding really compelling about Call of Cthulhu, even though the genre is 100% not my thing, I don't care one whit about horror, don't like it, have no interest in it, bores the hell out of me. as a genre, but I'm loving this game because the rules are so non-fight heavy. So, yeah, there are guns in there. There are rules for shooting things, but you suck at it for the most part. Most characters suck at it. They're not very good at it, and it's a very deadly game. So most of what you have to do, there's a reason you're called investigators. Most of what you have to do is not shoot things. It's do other things, and it's kind of retooled my thinking about this somewhat towards other directions. And I'm trying to apply it to other games to greater or lesser success. So the D&D campaign we're involved in with another guy that we have done things with, Andrew. I don't think he's been on the podcast, has he? Can't remember. Yes, okay, he was on the podcast once. So, yeah, it's a Fantasy Grounds. So we're doing Fantasy Grounds with Andrew, and the way that rule set works and the way that campaign works, it's very hard for me to role play. It's much more of a mechanical fighting type of game. And I'm having a lot of fun, but again, I think you're right. The rules and the approach lend itself towards one thing or the other. And believe it or not, I'm trying to approach that with Jimmy's Traveler campaign, but he has kind of retooled it to reflect his characters a bit more, his players, I should say. I'm not his characters, players a bit more, which is completely understandable and legitimate. So it's a little more of a challenge there to find that balance. And so I do think you're right. The rule set and the scenario should, as a player, lead you towards emphasizing one thing or the other. And you probably should pick the rule set that better matches what you want to emphasize in the campaign you want to run. That's just a general comment. What do you guys think?
That completely makes sense.
I find it really neat that Call of Cthulhu, it's one of those that, there's a fly on your friend's back. Well, I'll swat it, and you killed your friend.
Yeah.
And you don't have a lot of hit points, and damage is a very large fraction of that. And
both of my characters can attest to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first looked at it, I was like, wait a minute. I don't think you did the stats right here, dude. When I first looked at my character, I'm like, those are really low hit points. And these weapons.
I don't know. You're doing pretty good. You have 3 hit points.
Yeah.
Could be like.
Yeah. Well, I try to, when I run Traveler, man, I try to, I try to make it less combat heavy as well. Typically, I mean, it's been a while since I've done a Traveler campaign with you guys, but there'll always be some type of conflict, whether it's Call of Cthulhu or Traveler or whatever. It just seems to be the way you resolve things in these games. But I try to make it a thinking type game as well, typically, to try and figure out something, investigate something. That's usually my goal, to make it more than just you walk into a room and slay everything in the room and then look for treasure and then go to the next room. I think that's one reason I gravitate toward different games as far as me running a game.
Yeah, and then
I try to build some type of story.
Yeah, and then you get to use those soft skills like persuade, intimidate, investigate, research, those kind of things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get a little bit back on the topic because we've gone a bit afield, but I think that does bring up the topic at hand, which is, okay, so when do you determine? And I have a challenge with this as a player. My character may have certain skills that I as a player don't have. And Chris touched on this earlier when we talked about a character with high intelligence or something like that. But how do you guys feel about the roll check for a skill that your character is quite good at that maybe you don't? For example, I'm probably one of the least intimidating people I know. So if I were trying to do something intimidating, I don't necessarily know how to do intimidating things. And we ran into this in Jimmy's character campaign with Traveler, is that I was actually trying to intimidate an NPC, but I'm not good at it. Frank, am not good at it. Now it's arguable whether my character was good at it, but do you grab the roll whenever you've got that discongruence between the player and the character, or do you rather have them role play it?
If you're not comfortable role playing it, there's no reason that you have to. I think that if you have that intimidate skill, you can easily say, do you want to use it? Especially if the player says, I want to try and intimidate this guy. Well, if you're a big Marine and whatever, just standing over the guy and staring at him may be enough. Right? I mean, or you're heavily armed or something like that. You don't have to role play it. You can say, I'm just going to tell this guy that I need that information and I'm going to use my intimidate skill. And that's fine. That's good enough. You don't have to do that. Same with the intelligence role that Chris mentioned. I mean, I've played characters that are geniuses that are much smarter than I am in real life. So, for a DM to say, make an intelligence roll, and I roll the dice and I got it, you say, hey, you're able to work those calculations to make the jump into hyperspace, or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's just part of using your skills, using your attributes in the game for role playing.
Yeah, I use the stuck door test. So if it's a fighter trying to kick open a door, and it's it's like Frank playing. Frank obviously can't kick open a door. Heck, I don't think any one of us could. But fighter, with an 18 strength, yeah, sure, he can kick in the door. So that's the test, right? It's if the player's character has the attributes necessary to do it. You don't have to role play it to intimidate or kick in a door or persuade or
you could make him just do a Liam Neeson, from Taken. I've got a certain set of skills. I'll find you, and when I do, I'll whatever.
I know how to move the tuna fish that's expired in 1986 to the front of the refrigerator so you'll get it first.
But from a story playing standpoint, where do you walk that line between, okay, just roll to intimidate, instead of having a dialogue, a conversation, interaction, I'm just going to roll to intimidate. I'm going to roll to do this. I'm going to roll to do that, and then if you're just doing it that way, that's an extreme example. If you're just doing it that way, then essentially the GM's saying, okay, you successfully intimidated him and he tells you blah, blah, blah. And you successfully do this and they tell you blah, blah, blah. And you successfully do that and they do this. It's kind of a push button approach to role playing. How do you walk that line?
Well, probably a lot of that is personal preference. Some people like that quick game that they don't want to really involve themselves in a lot of role playing. Some people, it's if you're acting and pretending or whatever, some people just aren't comfortable with that. So they want, okay, I intimidate, my performance is perfect, rather than saying, I grit my teeth and my eyes turn blood red and that little vein pops out my forehead as I scream, a primal scream into their ear and scare the hell out of them. That's a lot different than be like, okay, I intimidated them. It's the same thing, people do. I think they get a lot more descriptive with weapons than they do with those little secondary traits. Like, okay, you roll a natural 20 with your sword. Well, it's easy to say, well, you cut him from stem to stern and, his guts hit the floor and blood sprays on the back wall, rather than I'm just being a little ultra charming and I put on a whiff of cologne and I go to seduce the maiden by, describing how much of a horseman I am, or, to try to, bat my eyes lovingly or something like that. I think people tend to shy away from the more social things like, performance or bluffing people or intimidating people or charming people or just talking to people in general. Like I make a knowledge check. Okay, I have this knowledge, rather than, and it, a lot of that is on the DM too, to be, to describe to them if they can't do it on their own. You play this lilting ballad on your lute and, everyone is moved to tears by the sheer passion of your performance. So it can either, you can compensate for the character's lack of either desire or ability to do it, or if you're a character and you really enjoy that stuff, like me personally, I will, I'm automatically thinking, how am I going to describe this, rather than be just like, okay, I make my intimidate, or I, make my perform check, or I make my knowledge check, how do I do it, rather than the fact that I just did it.
I will have to say that my wife had never role played or anything, but since we've been role playing through Discord, she said, one time when we played a little bit, that she was really disappointed that we didn't do voices. I didn't wear like a cape or a cloak or anything, or wear a funny hat or any of that stuff. She was just really bummed out that we, to her vision of what role playing was, we did not do. I guess, she was expecting us to do the really geeky stuff that they do in movies or shows and stuff. So
does she think I have a wardrobe at the house?
Apparently so.
My house
we have worn quite a few funny hats over the years.
No,
that's true. There are photographic evidence.
I've got pictures.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious then to talk a little bit about what Chris is. From a player, this is challenging for me. Give me a second to sort of put my thoughts together, how to articulate this. One of the things I dislike when I'm GMing and when I'm playing is, okay, stab it with my sword. Okay, stab it with my sword. Okay, stab it with my sword. I find that not terribly interesting. I'm going to just shoot it. I don't find that terribly interesting. I like to have the cinematic cool thing that you do. But at some point, what you're describing doesn't have a binary, yeah, you do it, you don't. In a to hit context, it does. But most of the time when you're doing something, a skill check, whether it's seduce or intimidate or knowledge or whatever it may be, you've got a sliding scale, right? And it's not unreasonable for the GM to say, the thing that you've just described to me is very complicated and weird. So it's going to be hard to pull off. How do you balance that reasonably, do you think, just from a player standpoint and a GM standpoint, that, yeah, what they described is complicated, but at the heart of it, they're trying to do this and it takes a 10 on a D20? Or, how do you get that feedback to players to say, well, that's a little complicated. You're actually trying to do 4 actions, not 1 action. Maybe we want to break that down.
Well,
you mean as far as... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Do you mean as far as people, what they want to do as part of their turn, or?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking in terms of specifically, I pull back on describing my actions during combat. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get too descriptive with them on purpose.
Now, this is what Frank says. He says this every time. I'm going to stab him in the gizzard.
Yeah, I'm going to stab him in the gizzard with a flourish.
Actually, that's not true. I tell other people to stab him in the gizzard. I do that a lot.
Or stab in the eye.
Don't tend to, or stab in the eye. I tell you should stab in the eye. Just stab him in the eye. That's I say that a lot. But
I know I hear stab him in the gizzard quite a bit every night we play.
That's because I'm telling everyone else to stab him in the gizzard, and so you'll hear it a lot. N times however many players are. But for myself, I tend to want to say I'm going to do this thing because in my head I'm an action star, and therefore I can do these amazing things.
So it'd be like you would be in a combat and you'd be like, whip my pistol from my holster and I shoot him in the eye. And it's like, from a game master's perspective, okay, well, if you already had your pistol out and you were just shooting at him and not trying to hit him necessarily in the eye, then that's different than an aimed shot through the eye. So then you got game mechanics that come in and interrupt your cinematic moment. Is that essentially it?
No, I think that's a little tame because I think there's things that we understand the rules have mechanics for. So if you're doing an aimed shot, that's there's a mechanic in
an extra term.
Yeah. There's
usually
there's a mechanic for that in the game, right? But if you want to do something like I want to slide to I'm going to slide on my knees to the barrier and then put my hand up and then lay down covering fire, to get the guy to go turn around the corner. Okay, well, that's really just a movement and a shot, really. But I don't.
I would say if I'm a game master and somebody tells me they want to do some crazy move, I will try and make it happen. I try to fulfill people's desires in a game. If they're seeing it in their mind that they're sliding on their knees underneath a barrier and laying down covering fire, I'll try and make it happen. I've just got to try and figure out a way to make it work.
But there's a penalty. There's a game mechanic penalty there, right? Even in what
sometimes, maybe not.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that one of the challenging bits here, I think, from a role-playing versus mechanics is that if you move here, there's no penalty for movement. If I shoot 3 shots at covering fire, there's a rule for that. If I slide on my knees and under a barrier and do the same thing, because that's what's in my head, then, you have to do this extra thing. Oh, well, if I knew I had to roll an extra thing or it's a little harder or a little more difficult, then I'll just do the easier thing because the risk reward from a game mechanic standpoint is less than the role playing risk. You understand what I'm getting at? And
I do, but I would say that unless the results would greatly alter what the outcome would be, I would probably let you do it as a game master. I mean, just unless it was just going to be something totally unbelievable. I'm going to jump 20 feet in the air and then do a back kick and hit 3 guys. I mean, I can't let that happen. But if you just want to do some cool move, like slide on your knees and lay down covering fire, yeah, okay.
Well,
I mean, I would probably let you do it just because try to fulfill what you want to try and do.
Right. So the heart of my question though is when do you broach, and I know the answer because it's been every question I've asked, the answer has been, well, it depends on the situation. But broadly speaking,
it really does.
I mean, and let's just sort of make a caveat that in role playing, it always depends on the situation. 100%. It's always going to change from situation to situation. So we're talking about generalities here by definition. So with that caveat, at what point does it become, do you have in your head sort of a general idea of when you go, well, you're going to have to roll a little more for that versus, that's within the general confines? Is that a give and take dialogue that is every situation 100%? You never can determine that. Or what can you do? Let me rephrase the question. What can GMs do and players do to push that boundary as far as is reasonable without engaging the game mechanics negatively from a player standpoint? That's the way I want to phrase that question.
All right. Again, if it depends on what the player is asking me specifically they want to try and do, okay? If somebody says they want to do some cool move as they move and slide like Pete Rose and then roll back up or something like that, if it really is not going to affect give them some type of unfair advantage, okay, or something that just wouldn't totally not fit, I'm going to, and I bend the rules all the time, but my job as a game master is to try and help you guys fulfill your desires, right, in the game that I've created. So if you've got in your mind and you're role playing and you've got the cinematic going on and you want to do a cartwheel and then kick somebody in the head, I'm just going to have you roll kick somebody in the head probably, because that's like one attack or whatever. If you want to describe to me that you're doing some really cool move or something, that's fine. But if you're going to try and do something extraordinary, then I'm going to have an extra roll or something. I mean, if the outcome is going to give you undue advantage based on your roll. But then, sometimes if somebody's like, I'm going to, just make this particular move to make it better or not, I'll just look at that particular situation. I'll try to make it happen within the rules as long as I think it's feasible. Because, I mean, it's neat when people are being creative, especially in a combat situation, and not just saying, okay, I'm going to walk up to the guy and stab it with my sword. I mean, because that's what we always do. But if you're going to try and do something, in the gizzard, so, you see what I'm saying from a game master's point of view. If you're telling me you're doing some special thing or whatever, I'll usually try and make that happen or let that happen for you. It just, again, it depends. If you're trying to do 2 things at once or something real crazy that can really affect the outcome of this combat, then I'm going to have an extra roll or something because you're trying to do something extraordinary, right? Do you think that's fair?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's the reasonableness test, right? It's whether or not it's reasonable. That's what I did. So it's a lot of shades of gray in there, though. So if you're...
But see, look... But think of your character, Frank. If you're in Call of Cthulhu, you're a college professor. So what's your chance that you're going to go sliding on your knees and, shooting at people with your pistols and, dual wielding and doing cartwheels and kicking people in the head? You have to think about that too. You're more...
Yeah, well, in that particular case, we are talking about combat, and I probably wouldn't do anything noteworthy in combat with that character because that's, not...
Even though he is pretty handy with firearms.
Surprisingly so, but... I guess from me personally, I can only speak about me personally. I am reluctant to get too role play-y with things, and I'm using combat because it's an easy one for us to talk about examples of. But Chris gave great examples as a bard, things that you could try to do to seduce somebody or something like that. I feel a little constrained because of the fear of the grab the dice may be the response. of being able to role play, and I'm kind of curious again to tie it back to this topic. What can be done, if anything? Maybe the answer is that's just how role playing is. Nothing can be done, to kind of help encourage more engaged role playing, to alleviate the fear of grab the dice being the result.
Well, they do make some peripherals for some games. Like I'm looking on my wall right now. Like there's a deck of cards when we play Pathfinder called Social Combat, and and you can pull out a card based on certain situations. It might give you the opportunity not to have to use like a charisma based check or something where you're seducing someone or trying to bluff somebody. It might give you a whole other option and have that work towards the same end result. So it's like a crutch. Like not everyone can role play. I mean, and some people, I think it's good to recognize that it's just like what Frank was saying, like, I just can't do it. And that's fine. I mean, not everyone does, or not everyone enjoys it. But I think those other things you can bring into it, besides, just having a specific role that you have to make, it is being able to apply other skills, abilities, or whatever to the same ends. And a lot of those things that I play with, and I play with them all the time, but they do kind of help things along. They make it a little more stringent, a little more role-based than, and it kind of, offers suggestions on how this works out. Like you flex your muscles, you do a strength check, and, that would work as an intimidate, even if you don't have the skill. Because if you're a big, brutal, tough guy and you didn't invest any ranks or points into something like intimidate, you're just not going to be intimidating. Well, I mean, if you got like someone who's like Michael Clark Duncan or whatever from the Green Mile, yeah, I mean, no matter what, I'm going to be intimidated by that guy in the room because he's a giant, But if he doesn't have any ranks to intimidate, what does he come in and have like an ultra high squeaky voice or something like that? I don't know, but so there are other avenues out there I think to offer an aid, or at least a starting point for role playing for people, that's just not, as dry as just making a single die roll or something like that.
So are those cards like a substitute for die roll, or are they just a way to boost people's confidence to try different things in role playing?
I think it could be used either way. If you like those kind of things, or even, from the whole role-playing aspect as a DM or someone running the game, and you're not very comfortable doing that type of thing, you don't make all the voices or anything else, that really kind of adds a little more color to it. You can use it and whip it out every once in a while, be like, okay, you need to do this, or you need to do that, and this is how that happens. So it helps people along. It kind of fills in the gaps, in other words.
I always kind of wanted to do, like seeing you have characters or players that are uncomfortable with doing it, and then you have some that don't mind, putting some role playing in. Then of course, some of the other players might be encouraged by, oh well, Frank was doing this whole thing. He was actually trying to act out his, what is it?
Stabbing people into the gizzard.
Well, no, for his bard character, what is it that he does for the bard that the
vicious
mockery? Vicious mockery. And someone would go, "Well, I'll try to do so and so." But the idea is that maybe if they roll poorly, not a complete failure, but poorly, you got to go, well, you think you're kind of getting there, but not quite, and maybe you try and coax them to start say, well, I'm going to say something about his mom, or something like that, as a way to kind of help maybe draw, players out, to kind of, to do some of that. Maybe not really role playing it, but adding a little bit of nuance to it, maybe. Just a thought.
Just one thought.
Okay, so we've moved through this topic in a kind of odd path and whatnot. Does anyone have any other sort of thoughts on this broad topic or anything we've talked about?
Just that there are places out there that talk about this. in depth, and you can check it out like at I think probably the one that I found when I was researching this topic that I thought was best is over at WebDM. There's a YouTube channel, WebDM, and on there they had an episode about when to roll dice, and they go into it in quite a bit of detail. And I think we covered a lot of the things they cover there. They're very specific with D&D 5e. So if that's your game and you want a little bit more information about what we just talked about, that's more specific to 5e and specific use cases, that would be where I would go. And you can check the show notes for this episode, and we'll have a link in for that.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Chris for being on the show again. It's always great to have him here. And if anyone has any thoughts on this at all, or comments or anything we've talked about, you can hit us up in the contact information coming along in a second.
That's all we have for this week. Thanks for spending time with us. Please leave a review and comments wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have topic suggestions or would like to get in touch, you can reach us at roleplaygeeks@roleplaygeeks.com. Head on over to the website for an archive of all our previous shows, as well as links to all our social media channels. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next week.
Good show, everybody.